Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX and I'm Megha Sharma. On the telecast with me today is Terry Milewski. He's a retired senior correspondent at the CBC. He's also the author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of Global Khalistan Project. Terry, it's so good to have you on the telecast with us. We were just now talking about the Kanishka blast and how the perpetrators of the blast were not only not convicted, but they were let off scot-free. And you have done reports after reports, done massive research about how this entire clandestine operation took place behind closed doors to let these perpetrators, let these two terrorists let go of. And my first question to you would be about the fact that before the 9/11 terror attack took place, this Kanishk bombing was the biggest terror attack that the world had seen. So what happened that caused the Canadian government to not convict these two terrorists?
Well, there were really two blunders. The first was that in the run-up before the bombing, that the Canadians had the perpetrators under surveillance. They watched them and wiretapped them for 3 months before the bombing. They even followed them into the woods for a test bombing 3 weeks before the real thing. They received specific and abundant warnings from the Indians that there would probably be some attempt to smuggle explosives on board Air India planes, and still they failed to stop it. With all of that information, they didn't take it seriously. They didn't act on it. They didn't even translate some of the wiretaps. They wiretapped them, ordering the booking of the tickets that were used to check in the bombs on 2 planes back in 1985. And still they didn't stop it. Then the second blunder, which I would suggest to you, is that after the bombing, when they immediately knew who did it, because they'd had them, they were watching them. They just didn't figure out what they were up to exactly. After the bombing, the Canadians failed again to mete out what anyone would consider a due measure of justice to the victims' families. That is, by using a sort of Byzantine, out-of-date legal procedure whereby the defendants were able to say, oh, well, that evidence isn't admissible. Okay, throw it out. And that witness isn't believable. Okay, throw that out. All kinds of compelling evidence was thrown out and deemed inadmissible, including a first-person description of a confession by one of the accused, another account by one of the accused lady friends saying that he came to her house, for example, the night before the bombs were planted on the planes to try to borrow her car, saying, hey, don't worry, I'll bring it back because I'm not going anywhere, only the bags are going somewhere, and if I am caught, you'll probably never see me again. I mean, so all of the writing was on the wall. Canada failed to act. There's no way around it.
Absolutely. And what role did the former Canadian Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, have in, I don't know, was it a blunder on his part, or was he complicit in this entire hushing of the conviction of these two terrorists?
No, he was just a good example of Canadian complacency and indifference to Indian concerns. Because in 1982, 3 years before the Air India bombing, Canada and India both already knew that Talvinder Parmar, the mastermind of the Air India plot, was an international terrorist and wanted as such by India for the murder of 2 policemen. And so Indira Gandhi's government asked Pierre Trudeau's government, we want to extradite this guy. He's a dangerous terrorist. We want to extradite him for murder, bring him back to India for trial. And Canada refused. Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, said no. Well, the Canada didn't want to get involved in an internal Indian battle, didn't want to take sides, didn't really believe what the Indians were saying, and so they've just brushed it off. And of course, we know we'd be a lot better off if he just said yes.
But was there any conviction? What was the conclusion of the court of law with the biggest terror attack that has happened on the soil of Canada? And there has been no conclusion whatsoever.
Well, it wasn't completely inconclusive. 2 men were tried, Raputam Singh Malik, who was the financier, the wealthy millionaire businessman who was the financier of the Baba Khalsa, the terrorist group which blew up Air India, which was led by Talvinder Parmar, and Ajit Singh Bagri, who was Parmar's number 2 in the Baba Khalsa. He's famous because he delivered that famous speech at the founding convention of the World Sikh Organization at Madison Square Garden in 1984, where Bagri screamed out, "Until we kill 50,000 Hindus, we will not rest." And a rowdy crowd said, "Hindu dogs, death to them. Indira bitch, death to her." It was a frightening scene. Now, those two were put on trial, and because of the problems that I just described, evidence being thrown out, deemed inadmissible, witnesses who were deemed unbelievable, all kinds of legal problems, the case against both of them was deemed insufficient by the judge. There was no jury, and he just threw the case out. However, one man, the bomb maker, Indrajit Singh Rayat, was convicted, and he served pretty much most of the rest of his life from 1988 until about 2017, a total of almost 29 years he spent in prison.
Okay.
So it wasn't completely fruitless, but it was an embarrassment to Canada that the justice system was not able to cope with modern terrorism.
Now, in one of the reports that you had written in the past, you had also flagged this image on social media about Tajinder Singh Parmar being given a hero's welcome, him being treated as a martyr in Canada by these Sikh Khalistani supporters. And in fact, during one of these processions, we also see Jagmeet Singh, the new Democratic Party leader, who is then being part of the procession, being part of these tableaus which has Parmar's images, Parmar's pictures being paraded around. So what is Jagmeet Singh's association with the Khalistani gangsters, Khalistani sympathizers, Khalistani supporters, and why does he get prominence in the Canadian political circles?
Well, the last part is easy to answer. He's got enough votes. He got enough votes to win the balance of power in a minority parliament where Trudeau needs votes to sustain his government, and Jagmeet Singh supplied them, which gives him power. As for his associations, he was, throughout his early career as a politician coming up in the province of Ontario politics, he was a strong supporter of the Khalistani agenda, went to Khalistani meetings, spoke at those meetings, and used to go around telling people how, the Khalistanis didn't blow up Air India. It was the Indian government that did it, an absurd theory which is still current today. When Jagmeet Singh first won the leadership of the NDP party, the next day I happened to be anchoring a political show, and I interviewed him and I asked him, what about these martyr posters of Talvinder Parmar? He's Canada's worst mass murderer, the mastermind of the Air India bombing. He brought down the Kanishka, 331 innocent civilians died, and he's lionized, he's glorified as a great man and a shaheed, with life-size posters on the outside of an important Gurdwara in Surrey, British Columbia. And he refused to denounce those posters. He ducked the question 5 times in a row. And it took him 5 months and under pressure from within his party before he finally admitted that, Parmar was the Air India bomber. So that concerns Indians, and I believe quite rightly, that so close to the seat of power in Canada is a man like that who's basically made his career as a Khalistani sympathizer.
Also, what is the probability of now reopening the Kanishka bombings case? And more importantly, is there a possibility that if India were to raise this matter in international quarters, perhaps take it to the International Court of Justice, could there be some sort, because the victims and their families of the Kanishka bombing at this point of time still gather, still are, brought to tears because they have still not got justice?
Well, you're right about that, but I don't think that there's much prospect of a reopening of the investigation, which has been investigated for 38 years now by 3 different criminal trials, in each case involving Inderjit Singh Rayat, the bomb maker. Once for the second bomb, you'll remember, that blew up prematurely on the ground at Narita Airport and killed a couple of baggage handlers. The plan was for two bombs simultaneously going off opposite sides of the globe, a terroristic spectacular that would bring India to its knees and create Khalistan, blah, blah, blah. And the thing has been investigated also by the trial of Malik and Bagri that I just described. That went on for the better part of 4 years, all told, and by a judicial inquiry under a former Supreme Court justice. That went on for another 4 years. So there's been something like 300 witnesses and 1 million documents. I mean, you should see the stuff on my hard drive. I mean, it's piled up. All of the evidence and the transcripts and the witness statements and videotapes and you name it. And having done all of that, you can't subject the culprits as you see them. You can't subject them to double jeopardy. You can't try them again and hope for a better result. That's not how the justice system works here, or I don't think in India. I don't think you put them on trial for the same thing again. And as for investigating it again, it has been done to death. And we know who blew up Air India. It's not as though the same facts are going to give us a different conclusion.
Okay.
What sticks in people's craw, I think, is that the guilty were punished.
Okay. Okay. All right. Now coming back to the last 24 hours, where there has been a CBC News report that claims that they have gotten an anonymous tip, is what they say. And this anonymous tip mentions that there is human and signals intelligence that points to the alleged involvement of Government of India agents in the assassination of this Khalistani terrorist of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, how do you comment on this claim that has been made?
Well, I think that I predicted quite wrongly at the outset on Monday that pretty soon we'd see, in a couple of days, we'd see some leaks, and I was wrong because it actually took 3 days. And now we are starting to see the beginning of the war of leaks, where the Canadian side saying, okay, you're complaining, are you, that Mr. Trudeau has not provided evidence? Well, we'll leak some evidence, and that'll turn up the heat on you. And so they have leaked what they hope we will report, which is that the Canadians have some signals intelligence, SIGINT as it's known in the trade, in addition to human intelligence, indicating a connection, the link that the Prime Minister referred to, between Indian government agents or officials and the murderer of Mr. Nijjar. There is a second part to the leak, though, that is attracting less attention and that perhaps should get more. And that is that the Canadians are also leaking that during the weeks of meetings that the two sides have had prior to the G20 and prior to the breakout into public indicated by the Prime Minister's statement on Monday, that the Canadians shared what they knew, including the information about signals intelligence, with the Indians, and that the Indians privately have not denied the story that one of their officials was somehow involved in this murder. Now, that is a very big claim. The Canadians are sticking their necks even further out. If they can prove that, well, that's very interesting. And if they cannot, it's going to be a disaster for Trudeau. So,
do you also think currently,
Indians will have a counter.
Is it already a disaster for Trudeau, keeping in mind the kind of response that he was seeking or he was expecting from America and UK and Australia and other heads of the states in the West?
Well,
is a little tepid. Yeah.
I know what you're getting at. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But I caution you about that for this reason, that the Washington Post certainly did report, and now regrets it, I believe, and has retracted, that the Allies were very reluctant to support Canada as Mr. Trudeau hoped they would. And the White House, and most recently Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor at the White House, have vigorously pushed back on that. And Mr. Jake Sullivan said yesterday, for example, that no, that story is wrong. We do support Canada. We do know what this is about, and we view with deep concern the allegations that they are making in Canada, and that we want them investigated to the fullest. Now, that doesn't mean that we're endorsing it, but the other part of the first part of the leak, if you will, about the signals intelligence, is that it didn't necessarily come from Canadian sources, implying strongly that it came from American sources. So the Americans, which have vast capability to tape just about everybody's phone calls and then go back and listen to what you said, it sounds as though the National Security Agency or the CIA or some other shadowy intelligence agency in the United States was able to assist the Canadians with its investigation somehow, and to come up with a piece of intelligence, a wiretap perhaps, indicating that somebody was talking to somebody else about this and said something incriminating.
There was also indications, there was also sort of an expectation that was being made by the Canadian government for the Five Eyes to come and make a statement. There's been absolute silence on that end as well.
Indeed, and Canada certainly hoped for more, for a united front, as it were, standing shoulder to shoulder against India. Well, that's not going to happen. India's got simply too much clout nowadays, and is using that clout to discourage the allies to say anything untoward. They'd like to skate away from this. But remember that the Canadian tactic today, by releasing this little leak, that they may have more leaks still to offer, it's gradual turning up of the heat. Is it correct that the Indians don't deny this? Well, remember that it's possible that Mr. Modi knows what Trudeau told him. They had a frosty and brief meeting in New Delhi, did they not, at the G20? And Trudeau says that he raised this matter with Mr. Modi in, and I quote, the no uncertain terms. Now, it's impossible to imagine, I think you will agree, that Mr. Modi would have sat there like a potted plant and asked no questions. Of course he asked. What are you talking about, Mr. Trudeau? What is your evidence? Let's see it. And so it's hard to imagine that Mr. Modi doesn't know exactly what the Canadians are alleging and about who. And who might have been on the alleged signals.
Okay, but also, Terry, before I wrap this up, just a response from you about how the perception of the world, or particularly the Western nations, has been when it comes to the West, when it comes to the powerful nations going about on a tirade, on an agenda, on military operations to snuff out terrorists, whether it is Osama bin Laden or the attacks that have happened on Iran and Iraq and Syria and so many countries. It's sort of a given. Nobody asks proofs when these attacks happen, when these military operations happen. Is it a it's a perception that is created of a bias against India, against Asia, against the global South?
Well, I think you made a very good point, and it's a painful point from the Canadian point of view to remind us how warmly we applauded, for example, the assassination of Osama bin Laden. Canada was all for it, and now when it happens on our soil, we're not so keen, apparently. However, I do think that I think that this is a fair point for the Indians to make. However, I don't think the comparison between Mr. Najjar and Mr. bin Laden is really appropriate. Not in the same scale. Mr. Najjar was not in command of some vast international terrorist network that committed 9/11. We haven't seen anything like that. It was a completely different order of magnitude, and I think that matters. But having said that, I think we're going to have to give the Indians a fair point on that one.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Terry Milewski, for joining me on the telecast. I hope you're going to join us later on as well as we keep on. Obviously, this is a burning issue, and the India-Canada ties are at the forefront at this point of time. Difficult to patch up both the countries amidst the escalation that has been created by the Canadian government. All right. I'm also being joined by Group Captain UK Devnath. And Group Captain, you've heard it from Terry Milewski. He's a veteran journalist. He has written quite a lot. He's done all his research. He knows exactly about the India-Canada history, and more so about the Khalistani movement, Khalistani extremism that comes from the soils of Canada as well. But your perception, particularly now, of what the foreign policy of India is going to be vis-a-vis Canada?
Oh yes, there has to be light at the end of the tunnel. India and Canada were always friends. We respected each other country. We also have a historic reasons. We were connected by Commonwealth relations. We also have a lot of respect for Canada because India being a democracy knows that Canada also gives a lot of respect to human values, democratic values and rule based justice system. In India also we believe that we are a 2000-year-old, thousands of years old civilization, and we always put both sides, that is victim and the killer, in front of justice. Justice system in India is very elaborate and neutral. In this
right, but
present
also,
case,
you're talking about, obviously, we're talking about the rule of the land, being democratic about it, taking a fair evaluation of what has happened and what kind of trial has to be given. But these are points that have been raised by Justin Trudeau. But what we are saying is that why are we being put on trial when Justin Trudeau and his government is giving safe havens to terrorism?
Yeah, that is the irony. Canadian government under Justin Trudeau's leadership somehow has deviated and is not able to grasp the real reason behind all that which is happening in Canada. Instead of pointing a finger at his own domestic audience, in which 6 separatists, very few of them are the main culprits, instead of doing that, Justin Trudeau is trying to deflect the blame towards India, which does not augur well for future relations between Canada and India. I must remind everyone, viewers especially, that India always wants to cooperate with any international agency for any investigation. In case there has been some murder of a Canadian citizen, and in case Canadian government wants some help from India, we shall provide it. But before that, Canadian government must take Government of India and various other international agencies like Interpol in confidence.
Okay.
Give us the evidence, we shall cooperate, we shall reach the victim. We also want to close in and bite the neck of any mischief monger, mischief creator.
Absolutely.
In a very legal manner.
Absolutely, yeah. Rule of the land needs to be applied over here, and if Trudeau goes about saying that he does not want to escalate the matter, he wants to cooperate with India, that's completely the opposite he is doing in terms of the actions that he has taken in the last 4 days. All right, I'm out of time, but I thank you, sir, for joining me on the telecast, and thanks for watching NewsX.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.